my name is Lucas from Emyludesigns, and we are going to be taking a look at the long form or the original edit of the C-table build. Whenever I shoot these videos, I tend to make them long, as in like a B-roll first, and then cut that down to get it, to a minute or less for social media cuts. But I'm leaving a lot of material out. We'll go ahead and start. Here I'm walking into Lowe's, and this is one of my favorite aisles, obviously the wood aisle, but in the back, there's all the edge glued pieces, and they're great for all sorts of projects. It's affordable, so because the pieces are edge glued, that's going to be a lot cheaper. But here I'm measuring the board, so I found the 2 foot by 2 foot board that I wanted for this project, and I needed to find the center of it, so that's what you see me doing here, because it wasn't exactly 2 foot by 2 foot. And that's pretty self-explanatory. I'm just using a straight edge to mark corner to corner and make like a little cross section in the middle, and that tells me exactly where the center of the board is. And then I make a mark on a ruler so that I can set the table saw up so that it's the cut is exactly on that center line. And then that way, once I cut the board in half, I have 2 pieces that match up exactly. If you were to cut to the right or left of the line, then you'd have one piece that's slightly bigger than the other. So that's why I set it up where the saw cuts it right down the middle. And then we're going to take one piece and cut that in half again, and that gives us the top and bottom. And of course, you can see there I'm contemplating whether or not I should just take the easy route or go with 45s. And so I decide, hey, you know what? My followers can make a 45-degree cut, so I'll show them both methods. So here I'm using a table saw to make my first 45-degree cut, and then I show how I do it with a circular saw. So I set it up the same. I use a speed square just to check that 45-degree angle on both the table saw and the circular saw. And as you can see here, after I'm finished cutting, both when I line the pieces up, I actually let go, and they stayed standing by themselves. So the 45-degree cuts were dead on using 2 different methods, and those are with cheap tools. So, and here I'm just using some masking tape. Obviously this is pretty self-explanatory. I've seen it done several times, but I've never done these sort of 45-degree cuts in order to sort of miter a joint, because for certain builds, because I don't want things to be overly complicated. But I figured this was an easy way to sort of introduce my audience into this sort of style of woodworking. And then once that's folded up, if you have some clamps, now they have 90-degree clamps, which you could just clamp the ends and it would keep it together. And I think the glue is strong enough, you wouldn't even need nails, but I was a little impatient, so I decided to nail it up, and the clamp is just there to hold the piece up while I get the first nails in. From there, I just remove the masking tape, and then I just start sanding all that glue that sort of spilled out, off. And then to fill the nail holes, instead of using wood filler, I just used the sawdust or the sanding dust with some wood glue. Add a little wood glue, add some sanding dust on top of that, and then sand that back into the hole, and it worked great. So if you wanted to leave it wood look, at least the wood color matches. And then here I'm slightly off, or I wanted to get that joint exactly smooth, so I used a little bit of a belt sander, but really I could just use that palm sander. I was just being in a hurry. But you can see that 45 worked out perfect. Now this is the trim router, and I'm using a chamfer bit. It's a 5/8 inch chamfer bit. You can get them in different sizes, so the bigger the chamfer bit, the bigger bevel you can make. But I would suggest not going anything over the 5/8, especially for this type of router, which is a trim router. And as you can see, the ball bearing here, we've got a lot of router footage, so I'll just keep talking about it. And actually, it's a good opportunity to show you sort of the kits. I picked this up, I think it was like 20 bucks, right? And it comes with a couple of different router bits. And the chamfer bit was included in there. It's on the router right now, but you can find good deals on router bits by Ryobi, or whatever brand you use, either at Home Depot or Lowe's. Whenever I get to the notch, I'm actually using, this is what's called a straight router bit set, and that is the 5/8 inch straight router bit. And you can, just like I do with all my projects, I buy the tools or acquire the tools as I need them. So it's not like you have to go and buy a whole bunch of tools and then just start working projects. When you start your project, whatever it is, buy the tools necessary for that project. And then when you move on to your next project, if you need a new tool, buy the tool for that. You don't have to buy them all at once. So basically with the C table, I used the chamfer bit basically all the way so that I had the full sort of 45 degree of that chamfer bit so that the inside part or the inside route of the C table had the bigger angle to it. I guess if you want to say bigger angle. And then I lowered that to where I had about just maybe a 1/4 of an inch of the chamfer bit sticking up. So then as I went around the top side, that gave me a smaller angle, not smaller angle, but basically a smaller sort of bevel than the inside. And that, I don't know, it was just sort of a creative decision I made with this table. It looked, one, you get a little bit more space having that smaller bevel on the top, and then underneath you have that larger bevel, and it just, I don't know, it just looked good to me. And then I slowed down my footage. This is like, I might post this video later just by itself, but I really liked how it looks slowed down with the sawdust sort of, you know, spraying out. And I will say, if you use a router, you're gonna realize how much you know, wood chips and dust it kicks up, because it kicks up a lot. And after that, after, you know, all the edges were beveled with the chamfer bit, I sanded it smooth a little bit with 220 grit. And then here you can tell, this is where I'm about to make the notch. So to make sure I'm making that notch straight, I needed some sort of a guide. So the easiest way for me to do that was just to use the rafter square that I have. And those are cheap. You can get them anywhere. You can get them Harbor Freight. They're very inexpensive. And I suggest if you plan on doing any kind of DIY stuff, you have something like this, because you know, they're perfect for things like this. And so as you can see, when I'm making this notch, and in the original video that's short, you know, it's only a couple of seconds showing how I'm making this notch, which doesn't really give you the full picture of what I had to do to make the notch. But I had to go back and forth several times and lower it just a little bit at a time in order to make that notch. And as I got to my stopping point, which was about, you know, maybe 1/2 inch from the edge, I had to slow down so I didn't go past that. And again, just more router footage, you know, I mean, also, as you can see from this angle, if you're looking at the inside part of the router, you want to keep your fingers away from that. And shout out to my lovely wife for that shot, which I think I used in the video, which is really cool. Her filming me, filming myself. But as you can see here, I'm just gonna work my way back and forth, back and forth. And again, that's this 5/8 inch straight router bit. And you'll notice with these, right, they don't have the ball bearing on them, because you know, trim routers really are meant for, like, let's say this, you know, my desk. If I were to put laminate or something on top of it, like kitchen counters, and I needed to trim the edge, I would use a trim router with a ball bearing bit, like a straight bit, something like this. Maybe something more along the lines of this right here, but it would have a ball bearing on the tip, and that would guide the trim router along the edge, trimming what needed to be trimmed, but not cutting in deeper into the wood, because the ball bearing stops it, just like the chamfer bit, which you may or may not see here in a second. Actually, I think we just passed at 5. We'll stop and we'll rewind. So just to give it, you know, a nice edge, I just used the chamfer bit again, but only at, like, you know, maybe less than a 1/4 inch deep, just to give it sort of a beveled look around the top to match the rest of the piece. And then of course I used this Danish oil. It's Watco. Now Watco, it's a Rust-Oleum brand. There's lots, like if you go to Home Depot has a lot of Rust-Oleum brand stuff. Whereas if you go to Lowe's, Lowe's is gonna use Minwax, I think. So, you know, it varies depending on what store. So if you go to Walmart carries all Rust-Oleum stuff. But the Danish oil, I love this stuff. It doesn't leave a sticky residue. You know, it's got a great tone, and again, this is pine. and it just brings out, you know, the overall just look of the grain, the way that it, I mean, and I did 2 passes over, which I made it darker than I probably should. But you know, I was kind of intending on leaving it wood look, but we ended up doing a poll on Instagram, and everybody liked the wood look, but they said, yes, you know, paint it black. And I was like, I can't paint it black. So I ended up compromising and doing just the outside part black. So as you can see here, I'm just showing now the curve that you see there on the bottom corners here. That's what the router bit made. Now, if I had been thinking ahead, I probably would have done my beveled edges before I glued it up, and then I would have had a nice 45-degree angle there. But I mean, it looks nice the way that it is. So, but I'm going to show you how I sort of went about doing the finish. And actually, maybe we can fast forward through this part because it's basically me just taping everything off. You can see that I'm just taping around that top bevel, and I thought, you know, instead of you know, taping on the edge, taping the beveled part would be better because I'm actually painting less of the piece. And from the top, if you were to look top down, you'd still see that wood edge, which I really like. And this is just that frog tape, which is some of my favorite tape. Now, after staining it, it did have some areas that it was a little hard to have it stick to. If that's the case, if you go to ever put, you know, tape down on a project like this, and it's a stained piece, and maybe there's some oily residue from the stain or something like that, you could always clear coat it first and then tape it off, and that'll help the tape stick better. So when I'm spray painting my garage, I use a box fan or a couple of box fans to pull any of the spray vapor out of the garage. And that's just what I'm doing here. I set up my box fan so that it pulls all the vapors out. I wear a mask just to be safe. And then, you know, we wanted to do the chalked paint because I loved how it ended up looking on the end table. But after applying the chalk paint, I was just kind of like, man, it's a little too blue. Like, it doesn't look that color on the can itself. But after it dries, it just looked, had a little bit too much of a blue to it, at least for my liking. But the nice thing about chalked paint is that it really gets into the cracks and you don't have to lay on too many coats. It ends up really nice and thick. Now what I'm doing here is I'm testing the matte black paint that I got to make sure that it's going to adhere to the chalk paint, because there's a couple things that could go wrong anytime you put one type of paint on another type of paint, and that's things like crackling. So if you have, let's say, a matte finish and you try and put a gloss on it, sometimes you'll get a crackle. And that's because the gloss has, you know, I'm not sure exactly what in it, but whatever mineral spirits it has in it is meant to keep it glossy looking. But on a matte surface, the matte tends to act like a repellent, you know, to anything that's wet. And so you want to match that matte look or the flat look with something matte or flat, because otherwise you could end up getting some crackles, which is a cool effect if that's what you want. But here I just used this matte black on top of that, and then went back where I had a little bit of overspray or where the spray got under the tape. I just used some 220 grit sandpaper, and that gave that black edge just a really sharp edge. From here, after everything is sanded down and all my edges are nice and clean, I'm going to give it the clear top coat. The clear top coat is that same Rust-Oleum stuff that I was talking about. It's dead flat. Now I got all these paints from Walmart, but the thing I like about the dead flat is that anytime you have something flat, it hides imperfections, right? Glossy will really show the imperfections. The dead flat just made everything look like one piece, right? I had the black, I had the wood look, but it made it look, I don't know, like factory, I guess, like it was painted in a factory. So I really liked the stuff. And here I'm using some little, I guess they're just paint stands, the little triangle things that you can get. You can get them at Home Depot or, you know, anywhere pretty much, even Harbor Freight. It did leave a couple little dimples where I'd set it because, again, I was sort of rushing because I was trying to produce a video, but it's really unnoticeable. And here's the final piece. And here's, me probably telling my wife, here, add the iPad, and doing it over and over again. I end up with so many shots just for one video that it tends to be a little ridiculous, especially for social media. And all the different takes that I end up doing for these, me telling my wife, here, add the iPad like this, here, add the iPad like this. We had some comments like, hey, isn't that gonna bend the iPad? But no, I mean, it's in a case and it's just deep enough that it holds it perfectly, and it'll hold your phone too. But I mean, you could use it for pencils. You could flip it over and not have the notch if you want to do that, or you just don't even have to add a notch. I just thought, let's jazz it up somehow, and the notch to hold the iPad is sort of what I came up with. But anyway, we're getting close to the end of the video, but I really hope that you enjoyed this sort of behind the scenes look. You guys have a good one. So I saw a pretty cool table over at Crate and Barrel that would look great next to our couch, but it was $350. I figured I could make my own and made this for about 30 bucks. If you like learning how to make things for cheap, then follow our page. You might like it. If not, that's okay too. Have a good one.